I want to talk a bit about the murder of Iryna Zarutska, the young Ukrainian woman killed in Charlotte, North Carolina recently. Along with the murder of Charlie Kirk, this is once again opening up a debate about violence in America. Um, I think it would be hyperbole to say America's on the brink of absolute total collapse, but these things do raise a lot of moral questions. Very briefly on the Charlie Kirk thing, of course, I think people should have discussions, debate in a peaceful way, but I would say that MAGA Republicans have contributed to a lot of the toxicity, especially when they failed to call out their dear leader for the hate mongering that he's come out with. You know, when he talks about migrants poisoning the soul of our country, poisoning the blood of our country, it's that sort of narrative makes me just have no time for the argument that it's only the left that promote violence. It's rubbish. Anyway, um, Iryna Zarutska, like I said, was a young Ukrainian woman, and she was stabbed by a mentally unstable man in Charlotte. Now, I know some people will say talking about mental illness is somehow trivializing it or downplaying it, or somehow condoning the killer. Not at all. I think if that is a relevant thing, then it's relevant. Mentally unstable people who have a history of violence should not be on the streets. The judge involved in this case should absolutely resign. You know, often in the UK, well, I've railed against judges in this country, and I maintain that. I think the judiciary in Britain is tone deaf. We've had some judges that are clearly absolutely detached from public opinion. And I always assumed, well, American judges are elected, so there's more accountability there. If that is the case, then this guy should be face a recall or forced to resign or something. He has to be held to account for his judicial decision to allow a dangerous person back onto the streets. We've also seen cases in New York City with young women being attacked, just punched in the face. So there is a problem with violence against women in America right now. Although men are still the main victims of assaults, when it's targeted at women in this way, I think that there is more often than not a misogyny involved. That could be a component in this, but I think in this particular case, the guy, to put it bluntly, I think he was nuts. Based on what we know, he apparently thought that she was trying to read his mind. The footage is shocking. She comes down, sits down. I think she has headphones in, and Decarlos Brown, the suspect, he's the killer. He just lunges up and stabs her. That's it, and it all happens very fast. But there's a particular aspect to this which is about the bystander effect, and I want to focus on that. Before I get into that, there's a lot of people on the right, like Elon Musk and others, that have raised this issue, and I know there's been memorials, murals, for example, painted in her likeness. I have no problem with that because it's a very harrowing case. A young woman who should have been safe in Charlotte. Now, Charlotte, I don't know a huge amount about it. I know that it's one of America's fastest growing cities. I have to be honest, my overall impression of it's quite positive. Because Charlotte isn't usually named among America's more dangerous cities. For example, it's not often cited with Baltimore or St. Louis or New Orleans. It seems to be a clean city. It seems to be, attractive downtown area. I'm just going by pictures. I've never been there, but my overall impression is a positive one. It seems to be one of America's fastest growing cities. There's a thriving business and commercial sector. It seems to be a reasonable place to live. So I don't know. I mean, maybe anyone living in Charlotte can tell me what is it like to live there. I know it's one of America's fastest growing cities. But I have to say, a lot of the conservatives that are jumping on this, the same people, would be, push out conspiracy theories about the Ukraine war and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and in some cases oppose funding for Ukraine. Marjorie Taylor Greene, whose constituency isn't far from there, has opposed further funding for Ukraine. So I'm not sure if she's commented on this or not, but if she has, it's kind of ironic that that's the case. Um, okay, I'm going to read out an op-ed from The Hill. I don't always agree with The Hill. In fact, they've had journalists parroting Russian propaganda. But I do agree with this piece, and I'm going to read it out. It's from Robby Soave. It's an abridged version of his podcast, and this is on The Hill. I'll put a link, as always. And it's specifically talking about the bystander effect. Now, this relates to a timepiece in 1964. I'm just going to read this out briefly. Murder of Kitty Genovese. In the early hours of March the 13th, 1964, Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old bartender, was raped and stabbed to death outside the apartment building where she lived in the Kew Gardens neighbourhood of Queens in New York City. 2 weeks after the murder, the New York Times published an article, not Time magazine, the New York Times, published an article claiming that 37 witnesses saw or heard the attack and that none of them called the police or came to her aid. However, subsequent investigations revealed that the extent of public apathy was exaggerated. While some neighbours heard her cries, many did not realise the severity of the situation. The incident prompted inquiries into what became known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome, and the murder became a staple of US psychology textbooks for the next 4 decades. In 2007, an article for the American Psychologist found no evidence for the presence of 38 witnesses, or that witnesses observed the murder, or that witnesses remained inactive. In 2016, the Times called its own reporting flawed, stating that the original story grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses and what they had perceived. Now, I think that bears some relevance to this case, the murder of Iryna Zarutska, because already people are attacking the bystanders and saying, why did they do nothing? And I'm going to come to that in the op-ed. I'm just going to put a thought of my own here, and this will be controversial, but I'm going to say it. And I want to be careful how I say this. I'm not saying it's the case in this. I'm not saying it's what has happened here. But regarding the bystander effect, because of the sensitivity of race in America, Decarlos Brown is a black man. I think it is true to say that if people intervened when there is a black suspect attacking people, particularly if the bystanders are white, particularly if they're white men, there may well be a reluctance to intervene from a concern of being branded racist. Now, this isn't totally irrelevant. A few years ago in New York City, there was a guy acting violently on the subway, black man. And a white guy basically confronted him and put him in a headlock. I believe the guy was a Marine, and he was arrested. So there is definitely a racial component insofar as when you have a black suspect and white bystanders, and again, I'm not saying that's what's happened in Charlotte, that bystanders may also have been black, who knows. I think there may be a reluctance in that part, and there shouldn't be. I mean, it shouldn't be, race shouldn't come into it, but I would say the regressive left have created that situation. Because instead of looking at a criminal as a criminal, they think, oh, a white guy can't intervene against a black man because that's racist. Instead of just saying, yeah, some criminals are black. Black Lives Matter are guilty of downplaying black criminality. And frankly, it is a big problem in America. Of course, there's white criminals, there's Hispanic criminals, there's Asian criminals. But when it comes to black criminals, you get the left they have a very strange attitude to it. So in my video about Charlie Kirk, I was accused of ignoring left-wing violence. Well, this guy, who knows whether he was political or not? I think he was mad. But I do think the left have a lot to answer for in terms of urban crime, without question. So yeah, I do criticise the left. Democrat-run sanctuary cities, the record on crime is not good. Now, it's not historic highs. So, Donald Trump's using that to justify federal intervention. Actually, in most American cities, the murder peaks were in the past, in the 1970s. If you look at the statistics, most American cities actually had their violent crime rates were peaking in the 1970s. In the case of New York City, a bit later, 1990. What you get, I think, in American cities is these periods where crime kind of goes up, then goes down again. Certainly the average American city is a lot more dangerous than even London, which is why in Britain we shouldn't get into hyperbole about how dangerous London is. But I digress. The point I'm making here is Conservatives will jump on this to say crime's out of control. I think the real issue is judicial accountability, i.e. why did the judge allow a dangerous person onto the streets? This guy should spend the rest of his days behind bars. I don't know how you could rehabilitate someone like that. Clearly a dangerous individual. Anyway, without further ado, this is the piece by Robby Soave. Iryna Zarutska murder video draws outrage. Don't blame the bystanders. The main topic of conversation on social media today, this was published on the 10th of September, continues to be the horrific killing of Iryna Zarutska, the Ukrainian woman who was murdered on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina last month. Right now I want to focus on a common reaction I've seen, which is to criticise and condemn the other passengers on the train, the bystanders, who did not intervene to help Zarutska. We've already talked about the justifiable conservative outrage that this story did not merit I mentioned by the national media, even though one-off incidents are frequently seized upon when they fit a liberal narrative. Think of the firestorm, think of all the attention the wrongful killing of George Floyd received from activists, from the Democratic Party and from the media. Think of the firestorm it caused. But this killing, which was no less horrifying than Floyd's death, and if we're being honest, arguably more horrifying, given how utterly random and senseless it was, is being framed as an example of conservatives pouncing or seizing on a story that is inconvenient for the left. Why on earth is this always the framing? Well, that's a question for later. I want to turn instead to a point I've seen many people make, including many conservatives, and one that I actually disagree with. Ben Shapiro, for instance, wrote this on X. 1 minute 35 seconds block capitals. That is how long it was between Iryna Zarutska being stabbed in the neck by an evil and crazed psychopath and anyone doing anything. Many people stood by and looked apathetically at the phones. Bear in mind what I read about the Kitty Genovese case. I understand why some are looking to blame the bystanders, because it's true. There was no one who immediately rushed to Zarutska's aid. But I think we're not putting what happened in context. Because of my own history, I'm always wary of these kinds of things. I first came to national media attention for debunking a viral video that appeared to show kids at the Lincoln Memorial harassing a Native American man. You know, this is the Covington Catholic scandal. The video was selectively clipped and shot from a deceptive angle. This has taught me never to fully trust what we think we see on video, and indeed it is important to remember that the viral surveillance footage of Zarutska's death is not what the bystanders themselves witnessed. I'm not going to show that video, though it's available online if you want to watch it for yourself. I am going to describe what can be seen. If that's not something you want to hear, you should skip the rest of this radar. I'm just interjecting here. I have seen the video and it is harrowing. CNN also reports that Decarlos Brown had a long history of violence. So, you know, that judge is a disgrace that released him. What happens is that Decarlos Brown, the suspect, is sitting behind Zarutska, stands up, and without warning stabs her repeatedly in the neck. He then walks away. There are people sitting around Zarutska, but unfortunately her wounds are on the side of her neck that is facing away from the aisle. At first it seems that not even Zarutska understands how seriously wounded she is. But after just a few seconds she begins to lose consciousness. She slumps to the side and this poor woman falls towards the window seat and then towards the floor. There are many great possible reasons. There are a great many possible reasons why no one approached her for another minute. One, maybe no one had actually noticed that she was in distress. The blood was not obviously visible from the vantage point of the people behind her or on the other side of the aisle from her. Those people might also have been in shock or terrified of the knife-wielding crazy man. It's also worth pointing out that Decarlos Brown then left. He didn't hang around, he left immediately. They may have just thought he was a passenger getting up. Eventually there's enough blood for someone in front of Zarutska to take notice and valiantly try to help her, even though by then it's too late. But even if assistance had come a full minute earlier, I don't know that it would have made a difference, particularly as the knife went into her neck. That's my interjection. The reason I'm harping on this is that it's not the bystander's fault, is that I'm very wary of attempts to shift blame onto the bystanders. Let me be abundantly clear. The person who deserves blame is the perpetrator and anyone who participated in a system that wrongfully allowed a violent criminal schizophrenic man to be out in the streets posing a danger to others. The relevant authorities would sure love for us to point fingers at anyone but them. So I agree with that, with Robby Soave. The authorities do need to take accountability. The judge who allowed this dangerous offender to be on the streets should resign. Clearly is not fit to be a judge. In Britain, I think there needs to be a lot more accountability of our judiciary as well. But, I always thought in the States, judges were elected. If that is the case, then surely there could be some sort of way for him to be recalled or voted out of office. Now, I've seen the footage. It is harrowing. There's another thing to consider, and I'm no medical expert, but it could be that she was in such shock she didn't initially even know what was happening, that she didn't scream out. Because remember, she was in front of Brown. She wouldn't have seen him coming. You imagine you're sitting down and then suddenly someone's plunging a knife into your neck. You're not even going to know what's happening. And that's different from someone attacking you, like running at you from the front, where you would have time to really react and scream or something. So that's worth bearing in mind. It's an awful case. It's very harrowing. This young woman came to the United States for sanctuary. She wasn't killed in a Russian drone strike. She wasn't killed in a massacre, as so many of her compatriots have been. She was killed on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina. I would say, though, a lot of the Conservatives that are talking about this case, I wonder how many of them would advocate more funding for Ukraine. It makes you wonder. I have no problem with murals and so on being made in her honour. She should be remembered. This case should be highlighted. And there is a problem with violence against women in the United States. Violence in general, but the cases in New York City of young women being assaulted. Now, again, the thing I mentioned at the start of the video, again, people might think I'm race baiting, but I maintain that where you have black suspects and perhaps white witnesses, people might be reluctant, particularly white men. They might not want to be accused of racism by the likes of Black Lives Matter. I think that doesn't mean they shouldn't do anything, but it might be a component. There's another case, he mentioned the Covington boys case. I recall Oberlin College, where there's some white students accused of racially abusing black students. It later transpired that that wasn't actually what happened. Now, instead of punishing the students who made false accusations, the college's attitude was, let's not rush to judgment. Yeah, they were very quick to rush to judgment when they allowed angry protests against these innocent young men that were accused of racial abuse. It's one of the problems of the digital age that we're in, also with widespread disinformation. People look at video footage and they immediately jump to conclusions. So the CCTV that was on the train wouldn't necessarily show everything. So what I would say in regards to this case, a few things. Firstly, people shouldn't rush to judge the bystanders. It's true that some people are desensitized. It's true that some people won't act. But that doesn't mean that you know the whole picture. And it's all very well for someone like Ben Shapiro to imply that he would be Superman and swoop in there and save her. No one knows what they would do until they're in that situation. They just don't. We all like to think that we would be brave and do the right thing, but we just don't know. Also, you're asking people to intervene against a knife maniac. I mean, if they were then stabbed in the neck, what would be the wisdom in having two fatalities? I think the only, if you were going to intervene, you'd have to be absolutely sure that you could indeed tackle the guy. So perhaps on burly guys, for instance, they could restrain him or something. But even then, it's not a guarantee. I also think of, what about the possibility of having an undercover officer? Okay, but even then, can a police officer know what to look for? Can they react on time? Let's say Decarlos Brown got up and started stabbing her. Police officer then opens fire and shoots the guy. That won't stop her being stabbed. She's still being stabbed. So I'm not sure. The only thing that would have prevented this is for the incompetent judge not to have released this dangerous offender in the first place, is for him to be behind bars. That's the only thing, unfortunately, that would have prevented this. He probably is mentally deranged, so I know the death penalty is being mentioned. I don't think it'll happen because his lawyers will successfully argue he's mentally deranged. But he should absolutely be. He shouldn't be on the streets. This person is dangerous. The judge who decided that he was fit to be released needs to resign or be recalled. Um, some have even said charge of manslaughter. I don't think that will happen, but he definitely needs to be held to account. But I'm not sure how this sort of thing's prevented. I think that there's a lot of issues in America, certainly around mental health issues, around violent criminality, and apparently in this case also judicial accountability. Why is it that violent offenders are let back onto the streets? I mean, in the case of the New York attacks, violent thugs punching young women for absolutely no reason, not even muggings, not even trying to steal something from them, just God knows what. But in those cases, the sentences are pathetic. I believe in mandatory prison for violent crimes. Mandatory prison. And that's true on both sides of the Atlantic. Often in Britain, people assume, oh, well, the American system is a lot tougher. Not necessarily. Some American jurisdictions are pretty lenient as well. North Carolina, it's a Republican state. I would have thought it would be more hardline on crime. So I'm a bit surprised by that, actually. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. But it's a horrendous thing. My thoughts are with her boyfriend, with her family, with her friends. She should have been safe in the United States. Instead, she was a victim of a violent, horrific crime. Young woman with the rest of her life ahead of her. It's awful.